Good afternoon, everybody. Brian Neubert here from GoldandBlack.com. I'm in Mackey Arena today with your GoldandBlack.com Purdue Basketball Daily. Purdue plays Morehead State here tomorrow night, but I thought I would make today's topic for your little video hit today. Purdue's situation at the power forward position / 4 position. Really, you could just call it forward because it's a 3-guard era of basketball these days, so forward it is. As you know, Purdue is starting Trey Kaufman-Renn next to Ross-Ade. Mason Gillis is still a big part of things. Caleb Furst is still seeing minutes at the 4 in addition to being Purdue's number 2 center. So that's a lot of guys. Additionally, and I don't even know to what extent this is going to be relevant, but Purdue is working Camden Heide a little bit at the 4. For what circumstances, I'm not entirely sure. If that's just a emergency thing, if that's a foul trouble thing, if that's something Purdue would ever proactively go to, I have no idea. But obviously Purdue has a lot of guys here for 40 minutes to divide among them, and another one of these problems that Purdue's had over the years where it just seems like you have too many players at one position, not enough minutes for any of them. You know, I think that much was made this summer, and I started it, so it's my fault. Much was made this summer, and I'm not saying it's not relevant. It was news. It's still news. But Purdue's playing Trey Kaufman-Renn alongside Ross-Ade. I think that's looking more and more like something that's not going to be a 30-minute-a-game deal if it ever was going to be. It's obviously going to be a situation where Purdue starts that way, at least for the time being. I wouldn't anticipate Purdue changing anytime soon. But it's going to be something that is going to be more effective certain nights than others. And, Matt Painter has said that a lot of this stuff at a couple of positions is going to be more situational. And sometimes it's going to be based on game conditions, things like that. Not a whole lot of precedent for multiplayer platoons really being a thing at Purdue here over the years. Matt Painter's always been on record saying that it's important for guys to be able to get in the flow of games through playing robust minutes. But there's no reason that it can't work where you're playing somebody more than others, playing a different guy more than everybody else every game. There's no reason theoretically that can't work. It's just there's not really been a situation like that that's been really functional outside of Purdue having 2 really good centers that divided minutes right down the middle. The only precedent I keep going back to is a few years back, and it's many years back now, where Purdue had Dakota Mathias, Ryan Klein, and Kendall Stevens all basically playing the same position. That was the year that Ryan Klein probably should have redshirted, but he was too good in the preseason, so they deviated from what I think was probably a tentative plan to redshirt him. But I thought for much of the season, those 3 guys dividing minutes 3 ways really worked against each of them. It might be different for jump shooters than it would be for anybody else, but it wasn't until Kendall Stevens, fell out of the program kind of later in the year that Mathias and Klein both really took off. And I think that's really the only precedent I can think of a situation where, Purdue was trying to play 3 guys enough minutes at the same position. Now, I do want to point this out based off of the Samford game. I think that, the Samford game was a blowout from the first 2 minutes on. So I'm guessing that when Purdue gets out to Honolulu, or better yet, when Purdue plays Xavier next week, you start to see Caleb Furst slide more into those backup 5-minute role. Backup 5 minutes, whereas against Samford, the game was so out of hand, you could get Will Berg some minutes there in the first half and a lot in the second half. And as good as he's looked, I still think that he's probably a guy that Purdue can really take its time with. Doesn't need this year. I've said many times before, is you can almost redshirt him again, and that's a really positive situation for him. He's shown you some things early on here, but you don't really need him anytime soon, so you can continue to work with him, continue to make him better and better, and then by the time you need him, he could be in a really good situation. I was talking about 4 men, and now I'm talking about Wilberg. We really get out of our lane here very easily in these videos that I don't prepare for in any way, shape, or form. I just turn the camera on and talk. And but anyway, Purdue starting Trey Kaufman-Renn and Zach-Edey. The big questions there have always been, floor spacing, defensive matchups at times, just having a bigger, more plotting kind of lineup. There are going to be nights where that really works. There are going to be nights where maybe there are some problems there. I think it's probably more of a Big Ten optimized lineup than it is a non-conference season lineup. I think when you get into situations where you have guys playing bigger front lines, and those teams are becoming fewer and fewer. You just don't see them as much anymore, which is why Purdue here is kind of zigging when everyone else is zagging. I think it's going to be more potent on nights like that. I think it's going to become more effective if Trey Kaufman-Renn can show early in the season that he can stretch the floor. It was a good thing the other day when he made that first 3, put that on tape. But also the issues here are just you got 2 guys who need space around the basket, who occupy a lot of space, and are both kind of like go-to guy type of offensive players. I don't mean like Trey Kaufman-Renn is going to be the go-to guy when he's on the floor with Zach-Edey. I mean they're the sorts of guys who aren't necessarily complementary scorers. They're primary scorers. And I think that, Trey Kaufman-Renn, when he's out there by himself, is the guy you play through. Zach-Edey, when he's out there by himself, is the guy you play through. And now putting 2 of those guys right next to one another with very similar sorts of low post needs in terms of space, in terms of spots on the floor, things like that. There's going to be some stuff to work through there, and it's maybe going to be a little bit harder against some of these smaller school teams that don't have the traditional size and personnel up front. I think Mason Gillis has a huge role in this team still, even if he's not starting. I think his grit, his leadership, his vocality on defense, I think really matter. I think his ability to stretch the floor from the three-point line is a big, big deal. I think he can make different types of threes than the other 4s can. I think he can shoot on the move better than Trey Kaufman-Renn can and Caleb Furst can. And I think that just his experience and his intangibles have always been a huge deal for Purdue. Well, I can't say his experience has always been a huge deal for Purdue because early in his career he wasn't experienced. Now he is. But I think this year, I think his experience really matters. I think he plays really hard, and that's important. He's always had a knack for kind of changing a game with like an effort play, a hustle play, and that can be a big deal, especially for a team this year that has to expect to, get other teams' best shots every night. I think having that guy who can just make that little play that might get Purdue going in a game where they might otherwise be inclined. And, ideally you hope for Purdue's sake they don't have this night very often, but if there's a game where you just kind of hit the snooze bar and maybe don't show up with the same intensity that your opponent does, maybe it's a Mason Gillis chasing an offensive rebound and getting the Mackey Arena crowd into it, or just getting an offensive rebound when you're playing at Rutgers or something like that. That kind of gets things going. He's always had that knack. It's kind of hard to put into words how to describe it, but you know it when you see it. I think Mason Gillis is still a huge part of this team. I think it's really important for Purdue this year that they communicate on defense and help one another, and Mason Gillis is one of the guys whose voice you always hear. I think that's important. And then Caleb Furst. As I said before, I think a lot of his minutes are going to come as the number 2 5-man, but so far Purdue has continued to play him at the 4. I think I don't know how to classify him in terms of the other 2. He moves really well for a big guy. He has some size to him. I think you can do some different things with him defensively, primarily at center, but at power forward, he does move his feet pretty well. As strange as this might sound, I think that the 6'10" guy is probably better at guarding out in space than the 6'7" guy and the 6'9" guy are. But that's a credit. That's more a credit to Caleb Furst than it is an indictment of Trey Kaufman-Renn and Mason Gillis. But I think maybe his niche can come into play there. Purdue's not done a lot of stuff with him in terms of feeding the post when he's at center or at power forward. No reason they can't. But I think he's sort of the guy that you can run some pick and roll with, roll him into some post ups if he gets his shooting touch back. And it was good to see him again, just like Trey Kaufman-Renn, making that first three of the season. Last year, his shot didn't look, very. I can't say it didn't look confident because shots aren't confident. Players are confident. He didn't look terribly confident shooting the ball, but maybe, a year of experience with this infrastructure with Braden Smith and Ross-Ade and whatnot, being what they are, perhaps that gets his shooting touch ironed out a little bit. Great energy guy. That's a little bit of what Purdue gets out of Gillis, obviously, too, but Caleb Furst is a really good energy guy as well. A really good athlete for his size. Just how Purdue applies these three guys on any given night is going to be an interesting storyline to watch. They're not as different as they are. They're not like 180 degrees different. It's not like you're choosing between a traditional big man and like a fourth guard, like the way if Vince Edwards or Robbie Hummel would have been at the four. All of these guys are the same kind of subset of player, if not the same category of player. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. There's not a polar opposite that would make more situational sense based on matchups, but I guess it kind of comes down to the hot hand. How you determine the hot hand during a game after the first few minutes of a game is part of the reason Matt Painter gets paid very well to make these decisions. So that's what I got for today. I am out here for basketball. I'm going to talk to all the coaches about their signees yesterday. Mike will be talking to some players, and we'll have some stuff on the site later this afternoon, plus our preview tomorrow of the Morehead State game and full coverage thereafter, because I know what you want to be doing on a Friday night, because you're all such fun people, is sitting at home at midnight reading my story and Mike Carmen's stories about Purdue's game against Morehead State. So you will have that opportunity tomorrow night, so behave accordingly in advance. Thanks, everybody.